this article in it with some brilliant photographs. And these are all photographs taken by Trevor Potter's dad.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, is that for VP Day or VE Day?
Well, VP that is there. It's correctly titled. It was VP Day. So.
Right.
Not VJ.
Oh, well, yeah. So,
yeah, it's a bit like the track and the trail.
Yeah, so they've given the credit correctly to the War Memorial, but they, of course, Trevor donated them to the War Memorial.
Yeah, they make you sign over your rights.
Yeah. Well, you don't surrender your rights, but you give special rights to the...
And then they charge everyone else a fortune if you want to get a nice, copy.
Yeah.
Nice copy.
But they're very good photos. His father was, I think even then, back working for the Courier Mail as a staff photographer by that time.
Darryl, I see that one of your guests has logged in.
Oh, terrific.
Charles Cotton.
G'day, Charles. Welcome.
He's muted at the moment.
Right.
You're Sidney's son?
Yep.
Very good.
Whereabouts are you, Charles? Where are you located? Okay. So,
no worries. Yeah, well, did you, I know I sent you, guess it's your sister, the audio file links. Well, there's also another link that I may not have sent her, unless Darryl did, of the video recording presentations. Okay. Good.
you're welcome. We've got a few minutes to go yet, so I'll refrain from talking about it quite yet.
Yes, yeah. Don't give away all your secrets.
Mary, I like that pumpkin shot of you.
Did you see my broom?
Oh, yes, yes.
I thought, that's the only way I fly these days. And which team am I on?
Gryffindor.
Yes. I thought I'd add a bit of humor to this really droll talk that we're going to have. Actually, Darryl does a wonderful presentation. I loved your first episode, was just so fascinating, and I tried to research and download movies or whatever, documentaries and everything. It was just so inspiring. It was wonderful.
Well, you would have heard lots of variations of it, I'm sure, too.
Yes, yes. I was disappointed that the first episode you did wasn't recorded, I don't believe.
I'm not. I'm just getting used to it.
Yeah, I think it's just wonderful that we have this technology now, and all this information is not lost.
Yes.
So it's carried on for prosperity. It's just fascinating stories, and we need this history kept. So
yeah.
Peter's done a wonderful job organizing these webinars.
Yeah, I re-listened to the audio myself yesterday or today, and I was impressed by the questions I got, which is a little bit challenging for this format. I get the impression people are often intimidated by the process and asking questions. And especially the longer the presentation, the less likelihood of people asking questions. It's like they get exhausted.
Yeah, well, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. There has been an odd speaker that was interesting that just carried on a bit too long, and then you kind of lose it. but I was wanting more, not less.
That's great. Well, I've got a couple of quizzes in this one, a couple of tests, so I hope you've all got pencil and paper ready.
Oh dear. Here, I got it. They'll make us pay more attention.
Okay. Yep.
What's the prize?
Prize? Oh dear.
Nice kind smile.
Yeah, nice kind one. Oh, well done.
Not even good enough. No, keep trying.
I'll
First
have to
prize
look
is
around.
one night out with Darryl. Second prize is 2 nights out with Darryl.
Jesus, you wouldn't want to come last.
How about a free pass to the RAF Aviation Heritage Centre, which is free anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just, it's my son's birthday today, and I remember when we went to the museum for his birthday, there was that outing that day. So that was on this day, a year ago.
Okay.
We went.
Well, we are open again, but not on the big open Sundays where we get 2,000 people. But if anybody wants to come out on Tuesdays or Thursdays, you just have to call and make arrangements. So they're hosting it. They're seeing all sorts of new stuff. So it's in full swing. Now I see down the bottom we've got Sally Ann joined us. Hello, Sally Ann.
Hi,
Unmute.
unmuting. Lovely to see you all.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Sally Ann's locked up in Melbourne no longer.
Yeah, freedom. 1 week.
Yes, no.
Yay!
We've still got the 25k lockdown.
Oh,
We do, but it's amazing what you can do in 25k that you couldn't do in 5.
Very true, but you can't even get to the airport.
No, that is true, and I can't get to
34K.
Charleston and all sorts of places, but that's okay. I've been on the phone today working out where I can go.
The Age has an app for it.
I'll check it out.
well, we still have some restrictions up here on New Mexicans south of the border. So
The terrorists or tourists.
My brother from Penrith is booked to come up here for a couple of weeks next Wednesday. I'll have to cancel that now. He lives in Penrith, and it's the greater Sydney area, which includes Penrith. His house where he's living with my sister is on the Nepean River. If on the other side of the river, you'll be able to come. But on the Penrith side, you're still in Sydney, greater Sydney area, so you can't come.
it's weird rules. I know a rule out at the Heritage Centre is because I'm an elderly volunteer, I can't host visitors. I can't act as a guide and show you around. But if you give me forewarning, I can leave the base, join your group and come back in as a part of your group
Sneaky.
and then show you around.
Sounds a bit like a strategy Dad would have used, Darryl.
I've done a lot of study. When I told the leadership about that, they just stared at me. They didn't say don't do it. So that's a green flag.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's how I got 12 mourners to my mother's funeral. One of them played the organ and the other played the violin. They were part of the providing team, not part of the mourning.
I read a very creative approach to Christmas where we're only allowed 10 people, but at funerals you're allowed 25. So they're going to have a funeral for the turkey.
Ah, what a good idea.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Innovative. Well, everyone, we're going to be starting soon. In a few minutes, I'll mute everybody. And if you could all please stay muted while the presentation's on and leave all your questions until the end. So we'll have a Q&A session at the end. and you can ask all those hard questions of Darryl. Shortly, when I mute everyone, I'll then ask Darryl and Warwick to unmute themselves, because it's sometimes a bit hard for me to do that for some strange reason.
No problem for us to do it.
No. And at the end, when you do want to talk, you can stay muted, but if you want to talk, you hold down your space bar is one way of, and then keep it down while you're talking, or alternatively, just unmute yourself. So what's the time? 6:59.
Using the space bar as a press to talk is a good way.
And up the top, at the moment, if you can see everybody, like about, I don't know, 30 or how many are
22 so far.
People, you'll see up the top right on most people's computers, speaker view. It's best to click on that, so for when you're watching the presentation, you'll then see just Darryl to the right normally in a little box, and the full PowerPoint presentation. So I might mute everybody now, if I can remember how to do that. Here we go. Mute. And Darryl, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and Warwick. And you've both done that by the looks of it. I'll start to record this shortly. I'll put this on I'll upload it to YouTube, and then I'll link it from YouTube to Facebook sometime tomorrow probably, and send the link out to everybody. So I'll just start a recording, and then I'll hand over to Warwick. So just give me righto, over to you, Warwick.
Good evening. Well, welcome everybody to our AHSA Queensland meeting for the October May meeting. We have many AHSA members from interstate, plus some guests. Last month's presentation, Searching for SAR, by David Lindley on 25th of September, we had 49 Zoom attendees. But Peter Dunn, has reported that more than 1,400 views of the recording have been seen on Facebook. And a special extra presentation with Terry Popovic about the P-47s in the Southwest Pacific area on the 14th of October. We had 49 attendees plus at least 271 views so far of the recording. So these recordings on YouTube are very important. This year we're actually marking 50 years since Brisbane members of AHSA started having regular meetings. Initially these were held at Qantas House in Queen Street, Brisbane. And, beg your pardon, but we've got initially AHSA meetings are going from before that in the state. So AHSA itself has been going for at least 55 years. I first attended AHSA meetings in Sydney in the mid-60s. They met at the Qantas House in Hunter Street, Sydney. There'll be more about a 50th year anniversary in next month or so, during next month. Got the picture of the Ukraine, yes. Len Bayliss took this picture out at Well Camp a few weeks ago. It's an Antonov 24 registered in Ukraine, and it was there from the 5th to the 9th of October. Who'd have thought that even 10 years ago that there'd be an airport out there in the country big enough for the largest airliners and freighters around. And the Wagner brothers just got on and did it in the space of a few years. Government program would have taken about 20 odd years. Cathay Pacific operating at Well Camp with these Boeing 747 freighters every Tuesday, and they take out good loads of produce and mining equipment, according to a relative of mine who flies these 747s. The freighters are still doing very busy work. Here at Alice Springs, photo, they've got now more than 117 aircraft stored there. There's 117 in this picture, but they're still adding more. It's the Asia Pacific Aircraft Storage Facility, APAS. Note that extra area in the bottom right of the picture there, and they'll be extending into that. The APAS Managing Director is Tom Vincent. says he expects that the number of planes parked at APAS will eventually settle at around 200. It takes a team of a dozen people up to 5 days to induct an aircraft for storage. 2 of those days are spent entirely on taping and covering everything to protect the engines and systems, a process that can take between 40 or 50 rolls of tape. Once they are ducted and sealed and towed to the area, each plane's on a rolling system of 7, 30 and 90-day checks. Must be providing a lot of employment for otherwise out-of-work airline engineers. We're now talking about future speakers. On 12th of November, Phil Vavre will be talking about Groote Island, the forgotten flying boat base. In 1938, the Department of Civil Aviation opened a flying boat base at the very remote Groote Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria on the western side. Why was it there, and what did this base comprise, and what remains of it today? You'll see that soon. And if you didn't see it on the live presentation, I suggest you watch Phil Vavre's earlier presentation from AHSA Victoria with the Empire Airmail System in operation 1938-39. That provides some essential background to the presentation about the Groote Island. 27th of November, we'll be having Michael Mulkinton, whose subject is Anzac and Aviator, the story of Ross Smith, who joined the AIF in 1914 and served with the Light Horse Regiment at Gallipoli and in the Sinai Desert before volunteering for the fledgling Australian Flying Corps. And he went on to become one of the most highly decorated fighter pilots. And of course, captained the aircraft, the Vickers-Vimy, in the first England to Australia flight in 1919. I'll hand back to Peter now, who can introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Warwick. So welcome everyone. Our guest speaker tonight is Darryl Purdom. Darryl joined the Royal Australian Air Force in January 1975, and his first operational posting was to the Aircraft Research and Development Unit as its supply officer. A year later, Darryl was posted to the new Tactical Fighter Project as a logistics analyst in Canberra to work on the team replacing the Mirage. Darryl spent 2.5 years in St. Louis in the States on the procurement team, running the IT section. Before the first aircraft rolled off the production line, Darryl was posted back to Williamtown to help introduce the aircraft into service. After 7 years on the Hornet project, Darryl moved to Canberra, working on some IT projects. He was then posted to the Jindalee Over the Horizon Radar project in Canberra for 3 years. In the last year, Darryl, by then the project manager in Alice Springs, handed over the project as an operational concern in 1993. Darryl was then based in Pearce in Western Australia from 1993 to 1995 as a senior stores officer, and then the officer in charge of base support services, where he oversaw the establishment of the Republic of Singapore Air Force Flying Training Institute at Pearce Air Base. In 1996, Darryl became the supply officer for the Hornet upgrade project in Canberra. Darryl spent his last 6 months in the RAF with McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis in the States again. Squadron leader Darryl Purdom eventually retired from the Air Force in August 1996. Darryl then moved to Brisbane, where he worked as a management consultant with Price Waterhouse Coopers, then as contracts manager with Stanwell Corporation, then procurement manager with Rio Tinto, and finally fleet logistics manager with GE Aviation as part of the total logistics management contract at RAF Base Amberley. Darryl fully retired in 2016 and became one of the volunteers at RAF Amberley Aviation Heritage Centre, where he still volunteers today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Darryl Purdom, whose talk is titled Sidney Cotton Part 2. Over to you, Darryl.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, just confirm that you can all see my starting screen with Sidney Cotton on it.
Yep.
Okay. All right, let's get into it. I've just going to apologise in advance for some of the tests that you have, the quizzes that I'm just forewarning you about. But also some of these screens are a little bit busy with copies of documents as opposed to just images. And I hope that'll be, the reasoning for that will come clear as we see them. Now, just repeating some of the information I went over in the first presentation. We have Sidney Cotton was a Queenslander. He was born on the 17th of June 1894 on a property called Gurganga, yes, however you pronounce it, which is up in the Whitsundays area just south of Proserpine. You can see the red diagram there for the property. It's just to the east now of the Proserpine Airport. And if you take a flight into Proserpine on the way to the Whitsundays, you'll actually cross Gurganga Creek and some of the property as you head out of the airport and go north into Proserpine. Now in 1900, the family moved south to just west of Amberley to a property called Hidden Vale, down here 25 kilometres west of Amberley, southwest of Amberley. Beautiful country farm area, very close to Amberley. Also on the map up here, you'll see Talagalla. There's a cemetery up here. I'll show you the photographs at the end. But that's where the family have interred Sidney Cotton's remains. So we like to think of him here in Ipswich or in Amberley as a local boy. Now in 1915, 21-year-old Sidney Cotton took himself off to Great Britain by sea and joined the Royal Naval Air Service. I won't go into a lot of detail here, I'm just going to borrow from that earlier presentation, talking about the Sidcot flying suit. So one of that first real claim to fame of Sidney in the aviation industry was the inventor of the Sidcot flying suit. Now the Sidcot flying suit did get amended and updated over the years, but it retained that basic characteristic of the one-piece flying suit and the name up until the 1950s, when synthetic materials came into fashion. There's some of the aircraft that he flew in the First World War. Those images are from his biography. Now, between the wars, he was involved in all sorts of business ventures. The most important for the context of this presentation is anything to do with photography. And there was more than one venture that involved photography, but the most important in the 1930s was his involvement with a colour process called Dufay colour. It was through this venture that he transitioned to the spy phase. So those two images on the screen are actually Dufay colour images. That one with Sidney Cotton in front of a Lockheed 12. Now, I'll introduce one of the other important characters to the story. This is Fred Winterbotham. He was the head of the air section at MI6. He held rank in the RAF, and he always referred to himself by a lower rank than he actually held. And there was a reason for that. He wanted to keep low profile. He was a little younger than Cotton, about 3 years younger. He'd been a RAF pilot in the First World War. He crashed behind the lines, was captured by the Germans, and while he was interned in Germany, he learnt to speak German. He'd spent some time post-World War I as a jackaroo in Australia. But in his role as head of air section, which was confidential, of course, he travelled openly and extensively to Germany. He met Hitler and Goering in that process. Senior Germans shared extensive detail on aircraft and Luftwaffe build-up in Germany with with Winterbottom. As a result, when he returned to the UK and wrote up his reports, he was heavily involved in the argument to up Spitfire production prior to the Second World War. Now, he was warned against coming back to Germany after the Munich Agreement was signed. So you can see on the screen there, Chamberlain at Heston. He then had to find other ways of monitoring and watching what was going on in Germany. He went and talked to his French counterparts, and they together, most likely the French, but together they came up with the idea of aerial spying on Germany. So with that, if I can find my cursor, here it is. Why aren't you scrolling through? Okay, with that, Winterbottom recruited Sidney Cotton through various contacts to a team to spy on Germany. Very quickly, he recruited a second pilot, a Canadian by the name of Bob Niven, who had just completed a short service commission in the RAF. So he was not British. He was a qualified pilot, very competent young man, complemented the senior, now 45-year-old Sidney Cotton, businessman. So here is a picture of Bob Niven in front of the first Lockheed GAFKR, which was essentially bought with French money. Winterbottom, in his accounts, talk about the French, as a part of this program, handed over a suitcase full of money, and they used that to buy the first 2 aircraft in that program. Now that program went on for a little while before Sidney got disenchanted with the French methodology and actually threatened to leave if they continued to follow that methodology. It's an involved story, and Cotton's biography covers his point of view in there. But Winterbottom relented. The French left the program. They took their aircraft with them. Winterbottom bought this 3rd aircraft. So this is the 3rd Lockheed in the program, GAFTL. And this aircraft was modified with all the different concepts that Cotton had learnt from the earlier program. So this aircraft had a camouflage, a pale duck egg green, he called it, a matte colour that didn't shine and reflect like the polished aluminium aircraft. The front windows are blanked out here because behind them are fuel tanks, so an extended range. It had this bubble canopy, which Cotton had painted it, so you could look out and look down and look back, and put your little handheld camera in there and take better photographs. So as well as that, it had cameras hidden away in the wings and in the fuselage back here. Okay, so that aircraft stayed with Cotton into the war years. Now that aircraft needed a test flight. I talked about this before, and it's relevant to this next part of the story. So in June, 15th of June 1939, Cotton and Niven took off in this aircraft to view and photograph locations, basically Italian locations, all the way from Malta, Corsica, all the way down to the Horn of Africa and back again. Now on that journey, they stopped. The first overnight stop was in Malta. There they met a gentleman called Maurice Longbottom, or Shorty, a Shorty for short. So I'll refer to him as Shorty because I cannot say Maurice. He was a flying officer pilot with number 202 Flying Boat Squadron, which flew Supermarine Scapa aircraft, a really basic flying boat. Now Shorty accompanied Cotton and Niven on that Sicily stage. So on that flight around Sicily. They stayed again overnight in Malta after that stage, but that's where Shorty left them, and Cotton and Niven continued their journey down to, like, as I said, to the Horn of Africa and back again. Just have relax here. Now, I talked in the last presentation about the Australian War Memorial has a set of 23 photographs, which are the only spy photos in the public domain from the spy phase. I'm going to show one of those photographs later on, just to support another part of the story. But the important thing here is they had met Shorty Longbottom in June 1939. In August 1939, well before the war, Shorty authored a memorandum called Photographic Reconnaissance of Enemy Territory in War. This is just a grab from, it's actually a grab from the RAF narrative, or a history of the Photographic Reconnaissance, Volume 1 to April 1941. There's a copy of this manuscript in the Australian War Memorial Cotton Papers. In this memorandum, the key element of it is this last paragraph, this last snip. The fastest of the fighters in service at present is the Spitfire, and the speed is one of the most important characteristics. It will be assumed that the Spitfire will be used. Now, this memorandum just didn't concentrate on an argument for the Spitfire, but it talked about tactics, cameras, film quality, processing, medical impacts, all sorts of things. Once you study Cotton and Longbottom, you realise that this was, Longbottom was using lots of information that could have only come from Cotton in this paper. Now, he wrote the paper, submitted it up to London. It was promptly filed and forgotten. Now, at the end of the spy phase and war is declared. I talked a little about this last time, so I'm going to be careful not to go into too much detail. But Winterbottom introduced Cotton to a wider RAF audience. Cotton had a slight idea, but no a broad idea, if you like, about how poor the RAF was doing in their aerial reconnaissance. In reality, cameras froze, images were blurred, and once the war commenced, they began losing aircraft at an alarming rate. They were using Blenheims and Lysanders. So the Blenheims for the more strategic behind-the-lines work, and in theory, Lysanders for tactical reconnaissance for the Army, directly for the Army. Now, I talked about this last time, but after embarrassing senior British Royal Air Force hierarchy with his aerial photography work at a second meeting, the next day, 45-year-old Australian Sidney Cotton met with Air Chief Marshal Sir Cyril Newell, the guy on the screen. He was the Chief of Air Staff. The Chief was blunt. "So you are the person who is giving us all this trouble?" To which Cotton replied, "No, sir, his name is Hitler." So this is another excerpt from a document that I think it's important to realise that these things exist. I'm just going to do a little zoom here. Just talk about some of them. What this is a letter that Cotton wrote to Fred Winterbottom, dated the 19th of September 1939, in which he accepts appointment and a strategy for getting aerial reconnaissance, I beg your pardon, the responsibility for getting aerial reconnaissance up and running. And he lays out what otherwise would have been just word of mouth conditions. So Cotton has written them down here. He acknowledges Winterbottom's role in the first part up here in yellow. In the second part here, he says, "I understand from the Air Chief Air Vice Marshal Peck has agreed that he shall have carte blanche in carrying out his work. All right, so the DGO is Director General of Operations, that's Peck, and the other element in here is Winterbotham would act as a liaison when required. So Winterbotham was still involved. Now, another part of this acceptance letter that's important to understand, and which was very unique, and it's probably even more unique in nowadays. He says here, I understand why it's not possible to organise and operate this matter unless I hold a commission. So he's talked with about accepting a commission. Then this second sentence, I believe you have discussed the matter with the appropriate authorities and it is agreed that there is no objection to my continuing to have an interest in my various businesses, provided my partner or directors of the companies manage and run my business matters. I found this very interesting in that that is just not how the military operate. Once you join the military, you are theirs, lock, stock and barrel, body and soul. So this is a very unusual arrangement. So much so, when you look at the things that happened to him afterwards, I wonder if people knew about this. I wonder if he told people, and that the broader, certainly the broader range of people involved in the story don't seem to have known about this. All right, so on the 22nd of September 1939, Cotton is appointed acting wing commander in the RAF with a charter for photo reconnaissance to get photo reconnaissance on the right footing as quickly as possible. Niven joined him. Winterbotham switched to the liaison role and continued to have not an oversight, but a liaison role. Following him into the Air Force, the RAF was the Lockheed 12, GAFTL. Here it is here in war livery. Now, as they were getting mobilized into a strategy for photo reconnaissance, Cotton and Niven undertook some more spying missions over essentially neutral countries in this aircraft. The Low Countries, if you like, German offshore islands, and Ireland. Now, Ireland was, if you like, commissioned by Ian Fleming. You know him as the author of the James Bond books. Cotton and Fleming were to end up being good friends throughout their later lives, and Cotton did a number of tasks for Fleming, who was involved in, he was in the Royal Navy on the intelligence side. So this task in particular was to scout around Ireland for possible submarine refueling points around Ireland. Now, I've read different stories that say that it was looking for pens, you know, submarine pens, or other facilities around Ireland. But the one that seems most credible to me, based on this photograph here in particular, is refueling facilities. Now, this is a photograph from that spying run that they did down to the Horn of Africa. In fact, this photograph on your screen is probably the one most furthest away from the United Kingdom. If you can see my cursor, this photograph was taken down here off what was then Italian Somaliland. I'm going to do this so again you can see this a little bit clearer. So this is photograph A of this little bay down here in Italian Somaliland off the Gulf of Aden, taken from the Lockheed 12 before the Second World War commenced. And it was noted up in the up here that this is a jetty with oil pipeline to a camp. This is a photograph that's in the Australian War Memorial collection, and it looked pretty boring and nondescript to me until you study it. So down here in the middle of nowhere is a facility, buildings here, stores or all sorts of different things laid out here. But the jetty comprises, if you can see them, all these little black dots. These are buoys leading out to a pontoon offshore here. So that is a way for pumping oil or liquid products to or from ships, and I'm going to say submarines. If a submarine wanted to quickly take on fuel, it would come up and moor to this buoy, anchor or moor to it, pull onto their vessel a pipe linked underwater to the shore, and they would pump fuel to it. A very, very easy process, a very portable process. And if you look at that, I'd say it's a pretty hard process to spot, especially if you're doing it in the middle of other things. But that's what Ian Fleming was asking Sidney to look for as in those missions around Ireland. Didn't find anything, and there's never been any reports that the Irish actually helped refuel submarines. Now, right from the beginning, as Cotton accepted the task and worked up his unit at the Heston airfield, he was given 2 Blenheim bombers. Basically, the Air Force were expecting him to take current photographic aircraft, improve them, and go do the job. Cotton didn't have a bar of that, wouldn't have a bar of it. He wanted Spitfires. But he accepted counsel that he had to prove that Blenheims wouldn't work before he got Spitfires. So he took one of the Blenheims and cottonized it. The term that everybody seems to use is cottonized. So they streamed the aircraft as much as they could. They made the tail wheel retractable, put in the teardrop canopy here. You can just see it there. Spinner, which improved airflow and cooling, camouflaged the aircraft, etc., etc. Now, all this effort resulted in increasing the aircraft speed by 18 miles an hour, 18 miles an hour, which was still 75 miles per hour slower than an ME-109. Service ceiling remained about the same, which was still 3,000 to 5,000 feet too low. So not only was it slower, but a fighter aircraft could build up its speed at higher altitude and dive on you and shoot you down. So Sidney was able to prove that improve the aircraft. It was then used for night fighter roles, for example. But he was able to show that it just wasn't enough. Now, this is again going back to the documents that are in the war memorials. I apologise for how clear they are, but they give the dates. So it says up here in yellow, although the new war establishment dated October the 20th showed 2 Spitfires as well as 2 Blenheims, it was not until the end of the month that the fighters were actually delivered to Heston. So Cotton got his 2 Spitfires at the end of October. Down here in grey, don't have to read it, but it's suffice to say both in Shorty Longbottom's paper and in other places, they state that they weren't wedded to the Spitfire. Whatever the fastest aircraft was of the day, right from the start, they acknowledged that that's what should be devoted for photo reconnaissance. At the time, it was a possibility that the Whirlwind would be selected and used. Although it was very fast, however, it couldn't get to altitude. So a comparable speed aircraft could climb to altitude and then dive on you, building up speed and shooting down. So the Whirlwind was never used. Now, with the Spitfires coming to Sydney, to Cotton and the establishment, Cotton tells a story. His part of the story does fit in his autobiography, but it doesn't fit exactly with the official history here. After Cotton got his Spitfires, Dowding, chief of the fighter force, wrote this: earnestly request that my Spitfire resources may not be trenched upon for any purpose whatever other than home defence fighting. Signed, Dowding. Now the chief went back to him and said, the commander-in-chief was informed that the Spitfires, Dowding was the commander-in-chief, sorry. So the commander-in-chief was informed that the Spitfires would be provided by maintenance command, not fighter command, that the allotment had been endorsed personally by the chief of air staff, and in due course, the machines would be returned when others with longer range became available to the special flight. Special flight is Sydney's flight at this stage. So Cotton tells it a little bit differently. He said that Dowding was pleased so much with his Blenheims that he provided Spitfires. Certainly, Dowding took everything he could. He took the Blenheims, asked Sydney to do some more work on other Blenheims, and he used them. But there's a little bit of an inconsistency there. Nonetheless, Cotton got his Spitfires in late October 1939. Now this is the first Spitfire, modified for aerial reconnaissance in the centre there. Serial number N3071. All right, get the cursor back. That's it in the centre. This is where I get a bit busy, so please bear with me. On the right, in the bottom right here, is a photograph of the Imperial War Museum collection of the F-24 camera installed vertically in the wings where the guns and the ammunition otherwise were in the aircraft. So that's looking down into the port wing, the left-hand side, as you look forward, port wing of the aircraft at the camera installation. This photograph on the right up on the top here shows it a little bit differently. So this is a later model Spitfire. Just about every Spitfire that Cotton received was improved upon from the last one. So in here, you can see the men have access beneath the wing to the camera. There is an intrusion. Can't think of the right word, but you can see there's a bubble teardrop cover over the camera here. They've taken the camera and its mount out, and they're changing the film or doing something below the aircraft. On the right here, you've got two fitters with a panel open in the outer wing. Now, in my research, I found that the next model Spitfires actually had a fuel tank out there. All right, so that's the only reason I can find why they're opening that panel out there. But in the early days, the early Spitfires, if you look at the drawing on the left, they just had split 24s out there in the wings. Later in Cotton's era, and this is a whole nother story about how he got cameras back behind the pilots in the Spitfire like this. For the sake of colour, I've included a photograph of a later model reconnaissance Spitfire. The four-bladed is the giveaway here at Duxford from my visit in 2018. But here's my first quiz. If you're sitting in the room and we were doing this live, I'd ask you what you notice about this first Spitfire. What makes it different? So I'll give you 30 seconds. You can write it all down and put it in a sealed envelope, and then, I don't know, send it to Warwick. And then I'll tell you the answers that I have. And I'll take the opportunity to get a drink. But have a close look at it. What makes this Spitfire different? Okay, I've had my drink. First of all, no guns. So you look at the leading edge there. The most obvious is they've removed the guns and they streamlined the contours of the aircraft. That is very smooth, very even. Next, of course, with no guns, you've taken out the ammunition. Then you have the camouflage. The early Spitfires had Cotton's camo tint, what he called camo tint, the pale duck egg green colour. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of that colour. It's the people I've been dealing with in UK cannot find an original colour photograph of that aircraft. They later changed to blue, tints of blue and other colours. Another one here is the battery pack sitting here on the ground. I'm pretty sure they didn't take the batteries out of the aircraft, but they might have used a lighter, lesser capacity battery. But the Spitfire had its own battery in the back of the fuselage section here, but it also could, in the case of a flat battery or a cold day when they needed to keep it at a boost, you could plug in another battery in here. So it might have just been incidental, but I've got a suspicion they would have tried a lighter battery as well. Sidney Cotton was famous for trying everything. Not everything worked, but a lot of things did. So another one that's a little bit obscure is the radio antenna is gone. Whoops, don't click. The radio antenna would sit back up here and there would be a wire to the tip of the tail. Now that's gone. So the photo reconnaissance aircraft, the radios removed to save weight. They argued there was no reason for a radio. The idea being, get in there, get your photographs and get home. We know you've done the job when you get home, when we see you get back. Also, on close inspection, I can't really see a bubble canopy on the side of the canopy yet. It might just be the clarity of the image, but I can't say it's there quite yet. The other things that happened to this aircraft, they took out the armour. After all, they wanted it to be the fastest thing in the sky, so nobody's going to be able to catch it to shoot at it. They also added a heating system for the cameras to keep the cameras from freezing up or misting over. So this aircraft, they were able to get this first aircraft up to over 390 miles per hour, up from 367. Now that may not seem much, but most important was its ability to accelerate from a cruise speed. If you were flying along, your cruise is already much higher, and you needed to hit boost and get out of there quickly. When the pilots report, when they hit the boost, the acceleration of this aircraft was dramatic, with a little bit of downstick, hit boost, and this, and it took off like a rocket. So it had a service ceiling. This is otherwise a standard Mark I Spitfire. Service ceiling was 34,000 feet. At this stage, it had no extra internal fuel capacity. Therefore, range hadn't noticeably changed. But this was it. Now, one of the odd things about, oh my God, good one, Darryl, excuse me, I've hit the escape button too early. One of the odd things about this photograph, it's captioned down here. It was the first Spitfire N3071. Are we all back? I gather we can see.
No, only seeing you. Seeing you, not your screen.
All right. I'll go back and share that. Is that back yet?
Yes, we've got the screen now. Your screen.
Okay. Sorry about that. I hit escape when I shouldn't have. Other interesting thing about that photograph in the middle, its caption says it's the first Spitfire, that's correct, at Coulomont Aerodrome, that's in France, in September 1939. Well, we know this aircraft didn't go to France until November 1939. They actually didn't get it until October 39. All right. So I'm aware of that inconsistency. Can't explain it, but there you go. Right. Now, that wing-mounted system for the cameras extended throughout the war, even though they developed other better and bigger cameras into the aircraft. So this is an image I found. You know it's later in the war because this aircraft's got D-Day stripes on it. And that's a close-up view of how they dropped the whole camera package onto the floor, doing what the two guys are doing what they need to do. Then they'll put the whole package back up into the aircraft, outboard of the of the main landing gear. All right, so November comes around, and on the 18th of November 1939, Shorty Longbottom, that's him at the top left, took the first images from a photo reconnaissance Spitfire. This is an image that is on the Imperial War Museum website. It's of Bullejon, 40 kilometres south of Aachen, in the border area with Belgium. Shorty, who wrote that paper, took that first flight and took that image. So down here on the bottom left, this is Sidney adjusting Shorty's parachute before he leaves for this sortie. So Shorty Longbottom has the credit for that first flight. Now, after they, I've got to take another sip. After Sidney was ready, and they're over there in mid-October 39, they kept one of their two Spitfires at Heston for training and development, and the other Spitfire, a single Spitfire, went to France and started working in support of the deployed forces in France. Now, this is a picture in the centre of Sidney Cotton talking to Air Vice Marshal Barrett, Air Marshal Sir Arthur Barrett, who was the air officer commanding the RAF forces in France during the Battle of France, and actually showing him a portfolio of photo reconnaissance. But in here we have, the top left, we have Bob Niven and Shorty Longbottom with two other of the PR pilots wearing Sidcot flying suits. Sidney used to be, he talks about being amused that people often didn't know that he was dealing with. They would wear them not knowing how they were invented and who invented them. Now the letter on the right is in French, but it basically gives the bearer full cooperation at French airfields, full security and other services. Now Cotton preferred to operate at French Air Force fields as the RAF fields. His people would get questions, they would question every request and service, wanting to know why. Hence challenging priority and secrecy. So the Heston flight was to have the only Spitfires operating in and over France in 1939-40, and they were not armed. He did a lot of work specifically for the French, but also shared his photo reconnaissance where he could. The French trained one of Cotton's team, a fellow by the name of Douglas Kendall, from a company called AHSA, we'll talk about them later, at their photo reconnaissance interpretation school, and through that Sidney's team adopted a lot of their methods. There's a report, a whole report, Douglas Kendall's report on that experience is in the Australian War Memorial Collection. Now, in that collection, there's also a French example of, or an example of French work, which is an analysis and study of power stations and a distribution network in a particular area in Germany, all from aerial reconnaissance. Okay, now Sidney's group, Spitfire, he's travelling to and from their group in France. But this is a report after, well, basically 2 months of Spitfire operations, but 4 months into the war. The RAF had flown, had covered aerial photography of 2,500 square miles and had lost 40 aircraft. The French had covered 6,000 square miles and lost 60 aircraft. The Heston flight, operating in France with one Spitfire, had covered 5,000 square miles with one aircraft in 2 months, in half the time, and had nil losses. So this report in after the January the 11th, 1940, was the crunch. This was the thing that hit the leadership of the RAF in the forehead and said, what you're doing is rubbish. You need to change what you are doing. Now on the left is a tracing that's in the Australian War Memorial collection that sits over the relevant scale maps of the 8 missions, only the 8 sorties that comprise that 5,000 square miles of coverage. All right, so that's the image. That yellow trace there is Shorty Longbottom's first flight, and that first flight actually isn't included in the calculation here. All right, so I'm just going to show you some examples of from the Cotton collection at Australian War Memorial of what they were doing with this work. So here's Barrett again with a map on his desk. This is in the Imperial War Museum's collection of Longbottom's first flight. We've had a close look at that tracing on his desk, and this is so Barrett is there studying Shorty Longbottom's first flight. This is an example, though, out of the papers at the War Memorial have. So I'm just going to show you one photograph, or 2 photographs from this set of photographs. I'm going to show you P59 here. It's from the Heston, AA just meaning the first set of flights, but this is the 10th flight of the Heston flight in Germany, out of France. P stands for the port camera, taken on the 2nd of March 1940. There's all the details there. So this is your second quiz. Oh, not there yet. This is what the area looks like now in Germany. You see the canal along here, this little offshoot area here, some of the roads, these tanks, they're all pretty much repeated in image P59. This is just the top half of P59 from that era, from that 2nd of March 1940 image. So here's your next quiz. If we were sitting in a room, I'd be asking, what can you see? So the interesting thing about these images is they are not reproductions. They're just copies of the original negative. The material at the Australian War Memorial is as original as you can get. And this is one of those images. Obviously you can see here the water tower. It's different from what it is now. But these tanks up here, they're still there. The lock is still here. This V-shaped little inlet bypass, that's still there. So I hope I'm not making you dizzy, but that's an image from early 1940. So what you should be seeing, and the War Memorial has the intelligence overlay on that image, and these are the notations on that image. There are a lot of complaints that the images that Cotton were taking were too small in scale. People couldn't, this is the RAF, analysts couldn't use them. We'll talk in a minute how Cotton solved that problem, but his solution meant that they could be analysed. So in that image alone, we have 15 factories, water tower, power lines, the canal and locks, barges queuing for the locks. You can read all those things yourself. Most interestingly was an aerodrome and anti-aircraft batteries. Now here is image 60 and image 59 side by side. These would have been used as a stereo pair. If you know anything about aerial reconnaissance, you have a stereoscope. You can look at these 2 images side by side and see a 3D image of the ground. Stereoscope also has some magnification in it, so you get to zoom in. You didn't see all of this image in the last one, but I'll just show you the aerodrome in the middle here. Can you see the tiny little cross in the middle there? That's an aircraft. That gives you an idea of scale. I can hear somebody trying to say, curse at me with that age of our poor old eyes. Factories are pretty easy to pick out because they all seem to be trailing smoke. Anything on the end of a smoke stack is a factory. The things like an airfield being identified by a single little cross down here, an aeroplane, or some of the anti-aircraft batteries, there, and there, has got me stuffed. I've resolved the next time we go to the War Memorial that I'll take a stereoscope and have a look at these things properly. All right, so that's an example of the images that Cotton was getting with the first aircraft. I've just put this one up here to give you some idea of scale of Cotton aircraft, what they were covering. The RAF's equivalent comprised 7 squadrons of reconnaissance Blenheims, and they're the numbers there. And they were carrying out jobs that they were trained to do over a lengthy period, and they were just not performing. So that's, now apart from the advertised work and the reported work that Cotton was doing, he did what they call the X series of flights and photographed Belgium. So I'll just read it out from this. This is in Cotton's own hand. He writes, Lord Gort, the Commander-in-Chief of British Army in France, said he could not oppose German armies if they invaded Belgium with success unless his maps had been corrected. So despite orders from the Air Ministry that no flights were to be made over neutral territory, we photographed the whole of Belgium in a few days. And this is what we find as a result in the Cotton collection in the War Memorial. This is an example of one folio in there. It's numbered number 53 of Braschaft, if I pronounced it correctly, 10 miles northeast of Antwerp. So it's still there today, but it's used as a light aircraft civil aerodrome. The aerodrome itself is the oldest military airfield in Belgium. That's it on the left today. And this is what Sidney's team discovered in 1940 with a matching drawing. Okay, so down on the right of this drawing, you'll see a little annotation that says AOC on the right down there. We'll talk about them next. That's the drawing that was made of that camp. Now, this is accompanying those Belgium shots is this map. It's dated 1938, February 1938. The reds there are the updated information that Cotton's team were able to find in their flights over Belgium. They're the other airfields that the Belgians had. All right. So, just as PRU, by May 1940, the Photo Reconnaissance Unit had discovered armour build-up in the Ardennes. They'd actually found armour there, but the information was in part ignored by the RAF. They acknowledged it, but they didn't have the tactical assets or decision-making agility, the quickness of thought, to actually exploit the knowledge that Cotton's group brought to them. So on the 10th of May 1940, Germany attacked through the Ardennes into Belgium. That day, Barrett asked Cotton for urgent cover of the country. While Barrett was talking, Cotton pulled from his briefcase an album of 52 photographs of Belgium airfields, each accompanied by an AOC Wild analysis. We'll talk about that in a minute. After overcoming his shock, Barrett asked for copies. Cotton had 36 copies of all those folios distributed to all the units that needed them within a day. So he'd anticipated this need. The two leaders of the Army and the Air Force had forgotten that they talked about this to Cotton some months before, and Cotton had just gone and done it. And when it was needed, it was there. Now, the Belgian problem the Belgian challenge brought up another problem, one of developing and printing the volume of film that Cotton was producing, then analysing it and using it, that information. That challenge was exacerbated by the fact that they were using cameras designed to be were optimum at 8,000 feet, whereas they were taking images from upwards of 30,000 feet. So RAF generally struggled. They didn't have the assets to support Cotton. Those 7 squadrons in the field flying Blenheims had capability to look after the Blenheims, but they were not there to support Cotton. He did not have the assets he needed. But in the meantime, aerial photography had been grasped by archaeologists, mining, surveyors, developers, etc. between the wars. I'll give you an example of that a little bit later. But so Cotton actually knew who to consult. A fellow called Harold Lemnos Hemming was a friend from World War I days who Sidney had engaged on one of his business ventures between the wars. He was now the managing director of the Aircraft Operating Company Limited, AOC, and its associated companies Aerofilms Limited. The latter, an aerial photographic and drawing office which interpreted and analysed film using experienced staff and modern photogrammetric equipment at Wembley, just up the road from Heston. If you see AOC or Aircraft Operating Company on documents, Cotton paid for this work himself, later being reimbursed by the RAF. So yep, you can see the King and Queen here visiting AOC. Oh, I don't have a date of that visit, but it became quite important to the story. Now, Aerofilm's work on PDU's aerial photographs played a major part in the acceptance by the military of this new technology and science. The detail they were able to extract from the high altitude photos amazed mainstream RAF and RN leadership. The companies were belatedly contracted by the RAF well after the outbreak of war, when Cotton showed examples of their work at high-level meetings and Churchill himself intervened while he was still First Lord of the Admiralty. So this is one of these. This is one of the most, the first of a series of photographs that and sets that Cotton did for the Navy, officially for the Navy in February 1940. The machine on the right there is called, or pronounced, Wild, but it's spelled W-I-L-D-E. It's a Wild A5 stereo autograph. AOC had one of these machines, and once the RAF took AOC under its wing, this machine was seconded along with another one that the Army had at Ordnance Survey at Southampton, and consolidated and used at a place called RAF Medmenham. I'll get on to that next slide. But gradually others of these were acquired. It's a Swiss-made machine, and throughout the war some of the machines actually made it back to Switzerland for repair and maintenance. But one of these Wild machines was on display at the War Memorial in London as late as 2018. But you take a stereo set of photographs into this machine, and analyst analyzes it and draws a map of what he sees, simply. Now, I'm going to run out of time here. I knew it. Now, AOC was incorporated into Cotton's unit initially, but very quickly in the 1940s, well, just before Cotton left, it was incorporated into a place called RAF Medmenham at Danesfield House, just outside of London, which grew from nothing to over 4,000 people by the end of the war. If you're familiar with the term, the Five Eyes Agreement, it's a current agreement between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom and the United States. It's been in the news recently, but it began at RAF Medmenham. Okay. Now, other things that were happening in the background, like I said, things that worked, things that didn't work. One of the things that they realised very soon that they needed a doctor as a part of their team at PDU. The altitude and the length of flights, the cold and the rarefied air, unpressurized, meant that the pilots flying these missions were their health was a major concern. One of the other things that they were trying to do was to fly their missions in all sorts of conditions and bad weather. So one of the things that they tried that didn't work was putting their Spitfires to sleep at night under these heated covers. So this was in these boxes underneath the wings are what they called a Robertson Thermax preheater. So they tried to keep the Spitfires warm so that they didn't need as long a time to warm up. It didn't work, so they abandoned it. There's a report in the Australian War Memorial collection with a lot more photographs, but yeah, didn't quite work. Now, early in 1940, the Royal Navy were desperate for information about the German fleet. I've already shown you some of the results at Emden, but each one of the missions that Cotton flew for the Navy resulted in lessons learned. So yeah, I'm going to try and skip that story. I'll keep going here. So we'll look at a couple of these flights. This flight was actually conducted by a Hudson. The concept was that the Hudson would take off in bad weather and then check the weather for the flight where your Spitfire was targets, the photographic targets. So that they, in that one flight, the Hudson would, with a radio, would call back to home base and report the weather, and then you'd launch a Spitfire to do the real reconnaissance. But in this first trial, the Hudson flew to Cuxhaven and to the entrance to the Kiel Canal. So this is the report of where he flew. And I'm just going to show you some of the photographs in the Australian War Memorial collection that shows you the results. So they dropped down out of the clouds in a Hudson onto a tanker. So all these photographs are oblique. So you'd call this a target of opportunity if you were in an actual fighting aircraft. But there's a tanker in the mouth of the River Elbe. This is a strange one, this one out here, because the location says it's 10 miles southwest of Heligoland, which doesn't quite line up with the map I just showed you earlier, but the date and time is consistent with the mission. So the date and time puts it as a part of this mission, and they've found themselves a submarine on the surface near a light vessel. So this is a Hudson flying just below the level of the clouds. So they fly up the Elbe, taking photographs out the side window, and this is the side window of Cuxhaven, West Quay in there. When you look at the original photographs, I had these in my shaky hands. These were crystal clear. They fly up the Elbe here, do a little circuit, go what the, and decided to look again, took a loop. And as they're flying back out, this is the entrance to the Kiel Canal. So up the River Elbe is Hamburg, a major industrial centre in Germany, and up the Kiel Canal is the shortcut to the Baltic Sea. So both the Tirpitz and the Bismarck transited the Kiel Canal when they went into the Baltic. So as they come out here, there's a cruiser and other warships navigating the canal. These would all be targets of opportunity normally. So they kept happy snaps looking back at the canal as they fly very quickly out of the place. There was no reports of anti-aircraft fire during this sortie. Still looking back, there's an observation tower here, and down the bottom a sound locator here. But again, No reports of anti-aircraft batteries or fire. Next sortie number 4 on the 2nd of March. This is in just about every book on photo reconnaissance, this one, and the original photographs are in the Australian War Memorial Collection, but this is Williamshaven as it is today and as it was on the 2nd of March 1940. All this white stuff in here is ice. You got to remember the time of year down here. So this is what you see in a lot of the books on the subject matter, this blown up in here. And this is really what the Navy wanted to know. Here we have the Tirpitz in dock, the Scharnhorst, Admiral Scheer up here in the graving dock, Königsberg class cruiser, what appears to be the Hipper, etc., etc. This is an analysed document. You'll find it, an analysed photograph. You'll find it in Cotton's book, but you'll find it in many other books on photo reconnaissance. Now, the important thing here, and that they learned, was Cotton's team got back with this photograph. Cotton himself saw it, analysed it, but the Air Force specifically had told Cotton not to share it with the Navy, but to pass it up to the Air Ministry itself, and that they would pass it on to the Navy. It took the Air Ministry a week to tell the Navy the result of this, during which time Cotton was frantic. He was getting calls on the hour from the Navy. Where are our photographs? Why can't we see them? Why can't you tell me what's in them? The RAF tried to analyse themselves. They didn't understand naval matters, and they just took their time. It resulted in a lot of very angry people, and it was part of the challenge that Cotton had with leadership. Now, one of the last ones in here is another very famous story. It's of Kiel. Initially, Cotton's team didn't have the Spitfires with the range to reach Kiel. But when he did, Kiel was top of the list. So that's what it looks like now. These are an overlay of a couple of images from the first sortie to Kiel. And this is the analysis of that sortie. Now, the flight there was on the 7th of April, the brand new Spitfire. And in the analysis, we see that the Kiel had a battleship in here. They called it a battleship. Aerodrome full of aeroplanes, lots of things going on. Now, because they'd never been there before, nobody realised what was going on. They didn't know whether this was normal or this was abnormal. Well, as it turned out, what we're looking here is at the German fleet and assets that were about to invade Norway. Images were taken on the 7th of April. This fleet left Germany late on the 8th of April and invaded Norway on the 9th of April. And I'm starting to come to a conclusion, and I might just skip through some of these. We've talked about higher, faster, further. So height, speed were the primary concerns, but range was also an issue. But basically, the first of every new model, the faster and higher it flew, came out as a photo reconnaissance aircraft. So the first Mosquitoes that conducted operations were a photo reconnaissance Mosquito. Interesting enough, the War Memorial Collection has a paper from Sidney Cotton to the RAF with a specification for a purpose-built photo reconnaissance aircraft. It was essentially saying, if you started from scratch instead of a Spitfire, how would you build a high-flying, high-speed photo reconnaissance aircraft? Now, Cotton didn't know the Mosquito was on its way, but there is a paper there in the War Memorial Collection. One of the other deficiencies was in cameras. Cotton was using f/24 cameras. That's the size of them there. After Cotton had left, they'd upgraded and installed these big F-52s in Spitfires down the rear. They were developed not by this person, but the sponsor within the RAF was Victor Daddy Laws, this gentleman over here on the right. So he's an important character at this time. I'm trying to speed up. As a direct consequence of the challenge of interpreting small features in images in here, taken with the F. Sorry about that. That's a good reason to skip that file. Now, I talked about Lemnos Hemming earlier and introduced Victor Laws. The reason why I did, these are two important characters in the story, along with Sidney, of course, but they had a history. Way back in 1933, and this is one of these odd things you find along the way, Hemming's company had been contracted by Western Mining Corporation, which was created specifically for the purpose of using aerial photography to explore for new gold mining assets in Western Australia. They contracted Hemming's company at that time, and Hemming sent out a team from the UK to survey around Kalgoorlie looking for gold. That team was led by Wing Commander Laws. I won't go into it any more detail, but that's in the recording. You can go and look at the little story about that little expedition in Australia. Now, one of the other things I wanted to talk about is this fellow. This is Squadron Leader Des Sheen. He served in the RAF initially on a short service commission. He was one of the few Australians to fly in the Battle of Britain, but he also...
They could only be seen if the warm engine exhaust left a vapour trail in the sky.
Well, when they gave him honorary commission as a wing commander, my understanding is that he brought the Lockheed 12 in and said, well, you can have the use of it, but it needs some new engines, so you better put them in, which they did. And then he produced a bubble canopy, which give you a better view on the side, so you can look down and see where you're going, and look behind and see where you're contrailing and things like that. I understand that he took a patent on it, so he was drawing a little bit of commissions as well out of the Air Force.
We became Sid Cotton's Air Force, you know.
If you've been airborne at 32,000 feet for quite a long time, you start getting the bends, which is like bits of nitrogen which popping up out of your arms. It was just irritating, but it wasn't painful. It was just a funny sensation. But I think we all experienced this if you a long distance trip, because they weren't pressurised. We set off and we spent the night at a place called Mo, and then on further and on down to the coast to Leluc, which was a French Air Force station way down in the south coast, and then on to Cairn. And Sidney said to me, well, he gave me a sheep of francs and said, stay the night and we'll meet in the morning. So we did. And I don't know what he did down there, but he took me out to an extremely luxurious boat, which was full of popsies and very nicely elegant people.
So I included that because this is an anecdote. That interview with Des Sheen is on the Imperial War Museum, reference number 1991, and you can listen to his complete oral history if you're that interested.
They can only be...
Now this is a ledger really of what they call the Italy flights. Now Italy didn't join the war until mid-June 1940, don't forget. But once Germany was in France, everybody was very concerned, including Cotton, about Italy's intentions. So he deployed a couple of Spitfires down to southern France, and from this you can see Des Sheen there flew a number of missions along with Le Musier and Shorty Longbottom from Leluc in France, or Ajaccio, which is out on, is it Corsica? Anyway, into Italy, looking at what the Italians are doing. So we're getting near the end here, and I've basically decided not to go into one of the controversial circumstances of Cotton's replacement at PDU. But by mid-June, the growth of PDU, we'd gone from 27 people at the beginning up to now 316 people. At this stage, they had 17 Spitfires and 4 Hudson aircraft from the beginning of basically none. And on the 12th of June, they were advised of another 30 Spitfires heading their way. Now, there had been a series of meetings back in London on the future of PDU, how it would be transitioned back to into the Air Force as a ongoing concern. Cotton had written on the matter back himself and made all sorts of suggestions, but he was not in the UK at the critical time when decisions were made. He was with his deployed forces in France, and people were writing to him, literally, and the records are in the Australian War Memorial Collection, saying, please get back to Great Britain, you need to be here. And he didn't go. He stayed in France with his unit. His main priority was the safety of his people, and he stayed there until the end. So I'm not going to show you this, but Winterbotham had a role to play in replacing Cotton. I'm not very impressed with the gentleman, but I'm not going to go into it.
The crunch.
All right. So Cotton, on the fateful day, arrives back in the UK, having transported a couple of people for Winterbotham back to the UK, and he was greeted with this letter. It essentially is a letter of dismissal. Timing couldn't be worse. Cotton had spent upwards of a month in France trying to desperately support the French and his people. It was 2 weeks after Dunkirk. It was 2 days before France and Germany started negotiating the second armistice. I made a note here that GAFTL, which Cotton was flying at the time, was very nearly not only the last plane out of Berlin, but also the last out of Paris or France. Essentially, that's the letter of dismissal. It's all very polite and formal. In Cotton's biography, he notes they got his name wrong now, down here, FS Cotton, not HL Cotton, and they inaccurately awarded him the AFC, which he didn't have. Just about all his pilots who flew sorties had AFCs, but of course Cotton didn't fly those sorties. So he was a very disappointed person at this time. He was there at the fall of France. He got back basically to be dismissed. I won't go into the details that I know about it because it would take too long. We're already over time. Just thinking about the lessons. In that short 9 months, Cotton had proven high-flying, fast, long-range aircraft, and the first of each new suitable aircraft should be dedicated to photo reconnaissance. He needed cameras suited to the task, and that was in train. He acknowledged the importance of aeromedicine, and he had the doctors in the unit. They realised the need for specialist pilots with patience. They could conduct planning and navigate in a single seat over a long distance. They developed special techniques and tactics to obtain the target photos and get them home. They incorporated modern photogrammetric techniques and applied them to stereo images. They needed to be independent, dedicated and specifically trained analysts and interpreters. The process must not be owned by a customer. That example I had of the Air Force sitting on Navy intelligence was just unacceptable. Women. It was interesting to note from here on, women became more prominent, especially in the analysis field, the intelligence and analysis field. And it was really the first time that female officers had male subordinates in any military, in British militaries, as far as I know. Anyway, also the concept that you need to be able to have, you need to have the assets to tactically respond to information. Knowledge is power, time is of the essence, and intelligence is perishable. That's another phrase you'll come across. Now there's just quickly, there's some side stories that intrigue me in here. In the documents in the War Memorial, nobody else has mentioned it, but I found this. It's a complete paper. It's a couple of centimetres thick, and it's titled A Note on the Method of Attacking the Axis Powers by Barnes Wallace. On top of it, please have a read. to Sidney Cotton, without whose support the dams might never have been destroyed. What? Nowhere have I seen anything, even in Cotton's biography or what I know about the dams, Sidney Cotton mentioned. But that sits in the Australian War Memorial. That document, the note on the method of attacking the Axis power, my British contact, Steve Lloyd, who unfortunately is not on the call. Last time I looked, he's been invited but couldn't attend. He tells me only 3 of these documents exist, copies of the original document, and one of them is in the Australian War Memorial gifted to Sidney Cotton from Barnes Wallis. I do not know why. Similarly over here, a personal note to Barnes Wallis, from Barnes Wallis. Not going to go into that one. After being dismissed out of photo reconnaissance, the RAF had nothing more to do with, that's the RAF, with Sidney for the rest of the war. However, he did get involved in some other ventures for the Ministry of Aircraft Production, one of which was an airborne searchlight called a turbine light. So it wasn't particularly successful. There is a smaller one that escapes me at the moment. But that's the image of a mosquito purportedly with a turbine light in its nose. The idea was to intercept bombers at night and shoot them down, so it's a night fighter role. But of course radar, airborne radar, came along and made this a little bit redundant. Now, just to nearly in conclusion, Cotton after the war famously got involved in a venture in India carrying ammunition to Hyderabad. The story is covered in his biography there, Aviator Extraordinary. It's an extraordinary story and I won't go into it, but it could take another couple of hours just to go through that. All right, so finally, just to come to the inevitable end, so Sidney is interred at the Talagalla Cemetery near Amberley here. That's the memorial on his site at Talagalla Cemetery. We've had Sally Ann and Charles on the call, listening to what I have to say. I hope they've enjoyed the coverage and it hasn't been too painful for them. And finally, just to get it on the record and on the recording, I had some dealings through Steve Lloyd indirectly with a gentleman called David Lafergie, that's his name there. He's actually the nephew of Bob Niven. So he, some of the images in here are from him. But he had a nice little summary of references to this story. So here lists 28 books that talk about Cotton and his uncle, Bob Niven. So you want to have a look at that later in the recording for some other readings on the subject. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I know I've gone something nearly an hour and a half, but for me, that must be a good record, I think.
Thanks very much, Darryl. Very interesting presentation, interesting topic, interesting person to talk about. And you've clearly done a lot of great research. Thanks again. So if you're happy to take questions, I'll hand over to the group to ask you some questions. We got any takers?
Comment about the F-24 cameras from Warwick. I did a bit of aerial photography flying for Joint Airlines. I had some F-24 cameras mounted in Comanche and a twin Comanche. They're quite long, as we saw in the photograph of the few people with the big cameras. I'm amazed that you can stick that in the wing with a lot of cameras sticking out the bottom.
Yeah, the F-24 is mounted in the wing. You see them noted up here that they only had a 5-inch lens on them. So you could get up to 14 inches, I think, out of an F-24. Yeah, here it is here, which is probably the size. Oh, am I still sharing my?
No.
Okay. Hang on.
It's got a picture of you. That's right.
All right. Is that my presentation back?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, you see the drawing up here. The wing, the F-24s in the wing only had 5-inch lens, whereas if they fit them back here, they would have been behind the cockpit with 8 or 14-inch lenses. So yeah, the little 5-inch lens is the problematic size for interpretation. The scale is just not there. But that's the images I showed you of the RUA. So you would have had, if you had F-24s with a long lens, they would have been these 14-inch lens. I had
Yes. Exact inches, but they were quite long here.
Yeah. I had I think I might have deleted it. I have another one of Trevor Potter's images that I'll go to that one if I can, that I had hidden, that shows people the difference in size of the cameras. Yeah.
Yes, the one on the left is about sort of thing I was accustomed to seeing. I remember Don Furlong did a lot of aerial photography work, aerial survey work.
So you can see the different size, length of the images of the F-24 camera there. So the ones in the wings would have been with this little short lens, whereas what you were used to would have been I think this is a 14 as opposed to anything else.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so you can't stick that in the wing, but so I appreciate your camera. But that's a 36-inch lens on that F-52 camera. So that's the new camera that was fitted in the back of the Spitfires. And look at the mass, the size, the length of that. That's a big camera. And I can tell you that because we've got one. As a direct consequence of the challenge of interpreting small. Sorry, that is the picture of that F-52 camera that we have with a 36-inch lens out at Amberley. I don't have anything next to it for scale, but it's a big beast.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, I've got a question, and Darryl, it may be kind of left field, but you know, I know my father was considered to be a colonial upstart.
Yeah.
I also know that he challenged authority to a large degree. So here's my question. From what you've done over the last 14 months, if Dad had his time again, what, if anything, do you think he might have done differently? Or do you think he would have been willing to continue to hold true to his values and confront authority and challenge practices that cost people their lives?
I think he did in the knowledge and the behaviour of the day. He did a wonderful job, quite honestly. The time that he got things done, and I'm talking days and if you know, and 2 weeks to get a Spitfire modified, and then on the job doing the job. I don't think he could have done it any other way than what he did. And time meant lives. That's the thing. You know, in the 1 week that the RAF sat on the intelligence on the Navy, the RAF lost 3 more Blenheims trying to do the job. That's 6 lives. Yeah. And that haunted Cotton. It honestly did. I tried not to get emotional about these things, but he just had to do what he had to do. Now, in modern management techniques, if he had, I've got a master's degree in project management, and I've got my thesis. I would have counseled him to do a couple of more things, not less things. All right, and you know, my view isn't that important to it. I have to keep thinking with the the nature of the times, the urgency of the times. They needed to be done. They needed to be done now. He knew what needed to be done. He had the experience, so he went and did it. It's one of the reasons why I included that excerpt of his acceptance letter. He needed to write down and tell his sponsors that he was going to do it his way. He was going to act carte blanche, and he was going to get it done. The bottom line of his statement was saying he was going to give it his all to get the job done. And that's what he did. And I don't know how many people knew of that letter.
I've never seen it before, and I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Down the bottom, the last thing was he had given his whole effort into building up an efficient flight for the purpose we have discussed. And he absolutely did that to the extent that it cost him personally.
Yeah. I recall a story where he believed that it was possible to fly at more than 5,000 kilometers, which was the attack range, to 20,000 with the warm air across the camera lenses, to be able to bring back meaningful aerial reconnaissance.
Yeah.
And because the system and the authority didn't believe in it, he took off over Ireland unannounced, potentially to be shot down, flew across Europe, came back and presented a 20-foot by 20-foot diorama of what he'd photographed, and they sacked him. And then the Navy took him on, and Air Force said to Navy, if you take this man on, we will cut off your supply. So he got thrown out of all the services.
Yeah, you've got from my research, you've got a few of the elements there all in one story. Yeah, the nature of his dismissal from the RAF, I find appalling. It was basically in the chaos of France and the fall of France, Winterbotham acting on third-party reports from a person who was just on the other side of where the Germans were, in panic, made a statement about Cotton that I just don't think anybody would believe other than the people who wanted to believe it. And with that, he got back to the UK and he was never employed again, to the extent that the RAF actively went to the Navy and said, do not employ this person or else. We will not be cooperating with you. So
I know, Darryl, that for much of what little time my brother and I had with him, there were stories about his work in the resistance in France. And I remember a few years ago watching the movie Hugo, which is about this child in the French stations, but it's all about the resistance. And at some point in there, they talk about the fact that Sidney Cotton cried.
No.
And I've not yet managed to get to the bottom of that, but at some point I'll have the courage to reach out to the author and say, what was that really about?
Yeah. That's interesting, man. I'll take a note about that and go look. Yeah. Look, for the other people on the call, there was Cotton got a lot of the leadership, and a lot of it was their own fault, offside, as he showed them things the next day after they said it couldn't be done the day before. He was going to meetings, having done his spying work, and they had experts on the other side of the table telling him it couldn't be done. And he's looking at these people saying, you're idiots, I've done it. And the next day he brought a whole nother set in of analysis as part of what Sally Ann was talking about, was when he was going to the meetings before he was called up by the RAF. They said it couldn't be done. The meeting ended at midday. Cotton went back to Heston, flew over France, took the photos in the Lockheed that the RAF were talking about, came to the meeting the next day. He presented the folio of shots that he'd taken the afternoon the day before, and everybody in the meeting thought they were taken from the spy days. gave him wonderful, good accolades. Yeah, these are very good films, but of course, oh, by the way, when were these taken? He responded, 3:15 yesterday afternoon. And the record shows that the meeting, because this is a minuted meeting, went into uproar. People called for him to be arrested for flying over neutral territory. But of course, Cotton was in the employ of the Secret Service, not the RAF. And so he stormed out of the meeting. He said, well, bugger you, if you don't want to listen to me, I'm leaving. He was Mr. Cotton, and they weren't listening to him. So at that point, the Chief of the Air Force stepped in and made his offer. And so Sidney didn't accept on the basis that he would follow the rules. He was going to do it his way, and hence that letter that I hope is still on your screen.
And I recall always that he had this saying, near his bed, that listening to the beat of a different drummer, the David Thoreau quote. And he did.
Yeah.
And had the courage to actually stand up to it.
Yeah, he'd learned his lessons. He didn't get there. He's 45 years old. He didn't get there from a naive young man like a lot of the new people joining the Air Force. He had 20 years of business experience, ups and downs. He knew what people were like, and he knew what the military was like. In the end, he didn't invest in his leaders. I have a concept, and I didn't want to do this. If I'm a historian, I don't want to bring my own views in here. But one of the ways you survive in projects like this, you make your sponsor the hero, not yourself. So the guy that called you in, you make him look like the hero he was for solving the problem by calling you in. And then you've got a friend, you've got an ally, and what have you. That's what we teach people nowadays. And your sponsor, the guy who brought you in, if he doesn't look after you, then go and find another sponsor. That's the lesson that I take away from this. This is almost a case study in what else you could do. What could he have done different? I wouldn't have said, don't change a thing that you did, but in the process, you should have looked after your sponsors a little bit better than you did.
The how.
Yeah.
And I think, what we're looking at is something that's like, what is it now? 60 years on? No, more.
Yeah, nearly 80 years on.
80 years on. In those days, that wasn't even comprehended.
No, that's right. Yep. And well, the idea of being attached to a sponsor in the Air Force was very much the case. So, for example, the people we suspect that undermined Cotton and saw him gone, they didn't actually last in the Air Force that much longer, all right, themselves. They were not particularly clever people themselves. They didn't last that much longer. But unfortunately, they would have had a structure of subordinates in their nest who were their people. And they would have looked at the loss of their sponsor as Cotton's fault.
Yeah.
All right. And they would have kept the chip on their shoulder. And I think they did in some cases, looking at some of the stories that follow that I haven't touched on.
Yeah.
So that was an unfortunate feature of the time. You had...
and more than the time. It sounds like pure Machiavelli analysis to me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ellen, it still exists today in
Exactly.
I spent the last 30 years of my life working in organizations trying to help leaders create environments where their people thrive and not survive, and yet that is so much part of what is there now.
Yeah.
Machiavelli was quite right in his analysis, I think.
Yeah.
It applies to corporate Australia and politics.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excuse me, Darryl, you might cease your screen share now.
Sorry. Yep. I'm getting quite worn out. I didn't, like I said, by this stage of the evening, you get quite exhausted.
Oh, it's a long and emotional story.
Any other questions before we call it quits?
Just heartfelt thanks.
Oh, look, thank you for coming, Charles and Sally Ann. It's wonderful to meet you and have you here. I hope that if you ever come to Queensland, look us up and look up the Aviation Heritage Centre. We would love to have you out at the site, and I'm sure the RAF would love to have you out there as well.
It would be a delight. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you, Darryl. Been a great talk about Sidney Cotton. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
All right.
Great evening.
Absolutely fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Darryl. Thanks,
Thank
Darryl.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.